second, but I'm going to be chairing this session before we sort of wrap up with the close for today. I'm Phil Greystock, I'm Dean of the College of Learning and Teaching at the University of Wolverhampton, and we have, I think, 8 sort of posters to go through. So our timing is going to be very tight, and I have warned the presenters about this. I have a stop clock which I'm going to be using here, but there's a separate poster channel. What the authors and presenters have done is, for most of the posters, there's a narration that goes with that, so you can look at the poster and listen to the narration as well. But we thought it was important to give you the opportunity to ask some questions and to get some responses. So what you might like to do, there are a couple of options here. You may want to go to the poster channel and just download the poster yourself. They're in a PDF format as a static poster along with the video, or you can, we'll show the poster at the same time, and what we can do is, if you're using a PC, you can press Control and then the scroll bar on your mouse, and that will make it bigger or smaller, and you can then pan around should you wish to do so, because I'm conscious that some of the text will be a little bit small. If you've got an iPad, you can pinch and zoom and do it that way. If you're on a Mac, I'm afraid you're going to have to work it out for yourself, because I don't use a Mac and I haven't got a clue how you would do it. I'm sure that someone will come on and tell me. But you can sort of zoom in and out if you wish to do so, or you may wish to get the PDF in the poster channel and have that available to you. We will be recording these poster sessions again, so as has been mentioned before, if you don't want to be recorded, make sure your camera's off. And what I'll do is I'll introduce each of the presenters to come on. I'll check with the presenter whether they want to bring up the poster themselves, or I've got it set to go, and we'll work from there. So I can see, thankfully, our first presenter is here. Nigel, can I just ask you to turn your camera off for the moment? So we just have the camera for the speaker on now. You're more than welcome to come back, Nigel, because I know you're going to be one of our speakers in a few minutes, but that's going to be great.
Now, didn't even realise it's on. It turned them on.
Oh, right. So can I just check, do you want me to bring up your poster, or did you want to do it yourself?
If you want to bring it up, Phil, that's fine.
Okay. So I kick up off. There we go. And if I just okay, so I hope that that's brought up the poster. Is that okay, Sue? Can you see that?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have Sue Beckingham from Sheffield Hallam University. Thank you very much, Sue. It's all over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about some research that I've done with students, the recommendations from the ground, student-led use of social media to foster inclusive group work. So the demand for work-ready graduates with a required collection of skills continues to rise. Communication and teamwork skills are consistently in the top 10 required by employers. From a tutor perspective, we know that engaging students in group work whilst at university can provide many benefits, including the opportunity to build friendships, strengthen social skills, enhance their well-being, support motivation, learn with and from their peers, brainstorm ideas, share the workload and increase productivity. And through these experiences, develop the confident workplace skills employers are looking for. And yet employers continue to lament that many graduates cannot demonstrate these skills. Prior research has highlighted that whilst engaging in group work can have many benefits, in practice it can also present a range of challenges. We know that our diverse student body includes those that commute to university, juggle work, have caring responsibilities. They may have a learning contract, or as international students are listening, learning and speaking in a second language. All of these can impact on the logistics of organising and the success of in-person group meetings, a crucial component of group work. In the literature, there are an array of examples of barriers affecting group work. For example, students not contributing equally, often referred to as social loafing and free riders. The implications of group size, where too many can be chaotic, but too few can present issues if one student drops out. Group dynamics, where students don't bond or where there's a lack of communication between students. There's also the concept of groupthink, where the students do not take time to review each other's contributions, where they value harmony over critiquing, or where individual views are disregarded, or the pressure to change their views to align with the others in the group. In this research, final year students and recent graduates were interviewed about their group work experience. Their responses reflected the literature. All had experienced group work in their first year that hadn't gone to plan. They suggested it would be helpful to engage in more informal group activities to get to know their wider cohort prior to working in groups, leading to a summative assessment. However, on a positive note, they felt encouraged by tutors to utilise both social media and collaborative workspaces such as Google Apps, as this had a positive effect on the way their groups connected and communicated. In addition to organising both in-person and online meetings, they regularly kept in touch using WhatsApp or Snapchat, and were able to plan and discuss progress, often taking a screenshot of what they were working on for feedback and using emoticons to indicate a smile or a thumbs up. They recognised it was important to have empathy and acknowledge individuals might contribute at different times of the day or evening due to other commitments. There was also consensus that the use of social media is established over time, providing flexibility and had overall been very beneficial. They suggested that it could be helpful to other students if they were shown what the affordances these digital spaces offered. Despite many growing up with social media and digital technology, they felt that peers don't always make the link with how these spaces could support their learning experience. Finally, when asked what skills they'd developed, they felt that they had learnt how to work cooperatively, to listen and communicate more effectively, and had developed improved time management and organisation skills. The graduates also added that becoming proficient in using these spaces had prepared them for the workplace, and in some cases given them skills they had gone on to teach colleagues, particularly through the pandemic, that didn't have those technical skills, digital skills. Finally, they felt it would be useful for final year students to share their experiences with the younger peers, to pass on tips in order to help them to learn how to overcome the potential barriers of group work. Thank you.
Lovely, Sue. That's fantastic. You've set a very good starting point for the rest of the speakers, because you've kept beautifully to time. So thank you very much. So we do have a couple of minutes for some questions. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask. So, and just to reiterate that the posters will remain there for tomorrow as well. So if you've not had a chance to look at them, they will stay in that poster channel for tomorrow, and then we'll make them available after the conference. So can I just ask if anyone has any questions? I'll just see if anything cropped up in the chat whilst I was sharing. Out of interest, Sue, if whilst people are thinking about that, I'm assuming these weren't self-selecting groups, they were sort of students were put into groups, is that right?
It varied actually, which is an interesting point, because in the first year, tutors at my university tend to put students in the group, because obviously they don't know each other. And then in subsequent years, they choose. And they did actually say that, you know, there's benefits to being in a group with students that they know, but also what came out is that sometimes they can all be the same and not have a wider skill set. So they recognise that actually having a blend of both is actually beneficial, but getting to know each other through more informal activities they felt would really help.
I think that's really helpful, and I do think it's important that we help students to understand why group work's important and what roles they might want to play within that. So that's great. We've got a question from Matt. How long does this take, and can it be used for staff development?
Sorry, can you just expand on that, Matt? How long does what take?
Sorry, it just occurred to me that, you know, the benefits of this would actually benefit some colleagues as well, you know, to come together and work on common projects.
Oh, I could talk about that for a long time. I have done before. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolute advocate of using social media. Yeah, to and you know, I was one of the founders of LTHE Chat, Learning, Teaching in Higher Education, on a Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock. Feel free to contact me about that if you want to know, and that's a great example of people sort of sharing information openly and discussing learning and teaching. But you know, you can also use a private group in Twitter or other spaces. You choose the space that you want to use, and it can be very supportive. I'm certainly in some groups, and that's helped me essentially through the pandemic, but it's continued, you know, and it's great to be able to use that those different mediums to share things, ask questions, help other people, you know, sort of reaching out to support others. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think going back to the previous point, I think it's really important if you do have diverse groups and you perhaps got some international students or something within them, this is an opportunity for that sort of more informal finding out about each other, you know, learning more about different cultures, etc. So I think it can be a really nice way, sort of alongside the group work, it's almost in parallel to it, to sort of try and bring those relationships together and to sort of enhance those relationships.
Definitely, and I think the fact that they can take time to read something, you know, particularly as an international student, translate it if they need to, you know, and then come back to answer it. Whereas, you know, sometimes it can be quite nerve-wracking face to face, can't it?
Wonderful, fantastic. There's a time for a very quick question. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Sue, thank you very much indeed for getting our poster session off to a wonderful start this afternoon. Thank you.
That's wonderful, thank you.
Excellent. Now we're going to move over to Eleanor Townsend from the University of Exeter. Eleanor, can I ask you to join us and turn on your camera? Fantastic.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Would you like me to put your poster up, or did you want to do it? Okay.
Yeah, if you could put it up, please.
I will just make sure I get to the right one first of all. Okay, hopefully that's available to you. Yeah.
Great. So this, I'm just going to talk about a project that's like really in its infant stages at the moment. So I'm from Exeter Medical School. So with our teaching, it's kind of like a double whammy really around inclusion, because not only is it important for the students, but it's also important for the future healthcare that these students will provide once they're doctors. So I've been looking at LGBTQ people and their representation in our curriculum. And as I'm sure will come to no surprise, LGBTQ plus people still face discrimination, both the healthcare practitioners themselves and as a patient, they are more likely to have worse health outcomes. So this is important for both reasons. So what we've just been doing to start with is a bit of an audit of our curriculum and seeing what representation is already present in our in the written components of our curriculum. So I've looked at 4 different types of session. So we have the traditional lecture slides, and then workshops that are a lot more interaction based, and then finally problem-based learning, or PBL, which is just completely discussion based, very variable what the students will discuss, and quite changeable as well. So to go through this, I went through like a 16-point framework, which just had lots of different areas in which LGBTQ plus people will face different challenges compared to their cisgender and heterosexual counterparts. So the results of this is like we have a lot of cases of representation, but we also have a number of places where there's more scope for inclusion. A big drawback of this is this was done on the first 2 years of the curriculum, sorry. And a lot of that is basic biomedical science. So for instance, if you're talking about the metabolic pathways in diabetes, that's not going to vary at all across these different populations. So for a lot of places, it's not reasonable or sensible to put in any inclusion. And what we're trying to make this inclusion is like really meaningful and like move away from tokenism, where it just feels like it's fulfilling a diversity quota. So what we're planning to do moving forwards is, especially with the problem-based learning, is put in sort of reflection activities where they have clinical scenarios. And because in problem-based learning, you're looking more at like multifaceted sort of social impacts as well, it's quite a good place to put it in and just think about these differences that people may face. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. I didn't really end on a conclusion there, did I?
That's right. Is there anything you want to add at the end there? Sorry, Eleanor, in terms of that conclusion.
I guess it's just, so going forward as well, we're just going to be looking more towards getting student opinions, and with focus groups and stuff, that's going to be the next steps for us, seeing what they think. And I think there's going to be a sort of concept of staff training as well, because what we've had, so with problem-based learning, it's mostly student-led, but there are sort of staff facilitators who lead the sessions. And in the cases where we have had representation in those clinical cases, sometimes staff members haven't felt confident enough to bring up issues around gender and sexual orientation. So I think it's going to be a sort of two-pronged approach of increasing staff confidence in how to handle these, as well as increasing representation and inclusion. So yeah.
Lovely, thank you. In some ways, you've sort of answered a question I was going to ask about the student involvement in developing this, so these materials and things. Has there been much sort of direct involvement in terms of their own case studies, as well as sort of that sort of partnership we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so more anecdotally, I've sort of brought it up with my students before. Unfortunately, so I lead a PBL group, but they did feel that the way it was included, they used the term diversity quota and didn't really think about it outside. So I think currently the way with that specific case was being handled in the teaching materials wasn't great, and it did seem that the students were quite dismissive of it. So going forward, yeah, we're going to set up some focus groups and things. We also have quite a strong LGBTQ staff network who work on a lot of these things too. So getting input from both the students and that other group will be really helpful. Yeah, I just think we really want to avoid it just being a diversity quota that means nothing, when we know it's a real effect and has real impact. And especially making any of our LGBTQ students feel comfortable and confident as well is also really important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's that the meaningfulness of this, and so long as the students understand the reason for it, and the staff as well, I think that's really important. Otherwise, the engagement's not necessarily there, the buy-in's not necessarily there, and and the staff aren't likely to sort of signpost students towards it if there's sort of some feeling that it's not perhaps doing the or meeting the agenda it's meant to. So I think that's really important. Any questions from anyone about this important topic? In terms of the focus groups, and how are you sort of rolling those out? Are you going to be asking specific groups of students, making it open to all students? How are you sort of trying to take that diversity issue into the focus group?
Yeah, so I think the plan is to do sort of semi-structured interview style in the focus groups, and I think we'll mainly be focusing on just the medical students themselves, to see, because the medical school does have other departments also in them who are sort of looking at similar things. So we have like medical imaging and nursing as well who are doing similar projects, but I think it will mostly be from the medical students. I think also what's quite important with this is the medical curriculum is jam-packed. Like there's not a lot of space to add any extra things in. So it's really about making these things count and sort of threading them through different themes as well to sort of build upon stuff. There's sort of a lot of discussion when you're teaching these sociological topics that are important to other, like with other groups as well, and build into medicine a lot, how to teach them effectively and make sure that the students actually learn from them, because a lot of the time they will only sort of stick to learning objectives, but then it's quite hard to write an exam question about, infertility care for same-sex couples, for instance. So it's quite a difficult thing to balance the teaching and compassion, and it's so trying to get it right.
Yeah, and actually that's a really important point, that you can't cover everything. There's a lot of sort of content, and this is another way in which it can be sort of presented. And Ashling's put in a sort of comment it's a really useful initiative to showcase how attention to diversity within the curriculum leads, by its nature, to an enhanced curriculum. And I think that sort of broader understanding, awareness raising is really important. That's fantastic. Lovely. Eleanor, thank you very much indeed for presenting your poster. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to Ros Collins. I'm hoping Ros is here. Ros is from Wolverhampton as well, and I'm aware that we've got our graduations today. And hey, and Ros is doing this. Are you still doing it by phone, Ros?
No, I'm quickly doing it on my computer, and because apparently we don't have to be there until 1:30. So it's fine.
Okay. Would you like me to put your poster on the screen? Shall I put your poster on the screen then, Ros?
Yes, please.
Just give me a second just to go to yours first. Okay, hopefully that's there for you, Ros.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you very much. I will try to do Karen as much justice as possible. Karen is an undergraduate student of mine who is graduating in an hour's time. So I said I would come in and do this because she hasn't got the time to do it today. So this is her project, her idea. She was very interested in the transition back to campus following the rapid changes off campus. She was wanting to know what would happen coming back. Lots of literature on what happened when we went off, but not so much coming back. So she wanted to specifically speak to mature students. We have a lot of mature students here in Wolverhampton. Our course alone is 50% mature students, and they typically have very complex lives, a lot of dependents to look after. So she was very interested in the fact that COVID was still ongoing, and the students were required to come back onto campus. So it's just interviews with 5 mature students, and she has done some reflection about the fact that she is a mature student herself as well. So some of the questions were specifically aimed about the concerns about coming back to campus. So there was a lot of discussion about transport and travelling in and touching stuff on the bus and masks and various things like that. What for me was most fascinating listening to the interviews and talking to Karen about it was this undertone of the going back to normal, but a different normal, it being a calm, but not a nice calm, and this kind of ghostly feeling. So the ghosts, I kind of call it ghosts in the institution and ghostly spaces, because they discussed it on both forms. They talked about the negative side of online learning because there were ghosts there. They were just a bunch of cameras, just a bunch of initials on the screen like I'm looking at the moment, and people wouldn't ask questions, there'd be no interaction. So it was very isolating and very demotivating. But they also talked about when they came back onto campus, which I thought was most interesting, that was how the campus has changed. And one thing I've noticed here is how vibrant and alive the campus is in the last week with graduations, and how that's been so vastly different from the whole year. They were expecting all their friends to come back, but due to some issues with dependents, so very ill parents or vulnerable children, or even childcare, keeping the kid at home because of COVID's hit the school and all that kind of thing, there was less of them coming in and enjoying the space and each other's company, which then meant the kind of peer support went down as well. So the themes were all interlocking. You had the ghostly spaces, the constricted choices that was all around the travelling aspects, but also the sudden changes. So a lot of the students talked about how they would have preferred it to be a bit of a phased return rather than, right, now you're coming in face to face. So you've had this online for the whole time, but now you have to be in face to face to do this work. They would have liked some sort of more of a phased return. And I don't have children myself, but I know that you have to book way in advance for after school activities, etc. So there was concerns about child support, etc. But this was all intermingled as well with their disciplined engagement. So there was this demotivation during the pandemic that has lingered when they returned to campus. So one student talked about losing her mojo, for example, and others talked about the difficulty in recreating that engagement strategy and that timetable structure that they had when they were originally on campus. So they've gone home, they've worked from home, and that structure's gone. and a lot of them were talking about how difficult it was to recreate the structure. Now they've returned. So although they have returned to what could be classed as normal, with a pandemic still continuing in the background, because these interviews were about the campus, the teaching, their motivation, their flexibility and strategies and styles. So I thought that just the tone of their voice and the way they talked about almost like missing the old and grieving the old and having to recreate and realign to something new coming back in. One of the things that they talked about a lot was the peer support that they would have got when they were originally on campus and how that's now lacking, so that collaboration. Wolverhampton is very much a university where students, it's a transactional university. They come in, do their lecture, go home, and we're trying to increase that collaboration amongst students and decrease their fear that they're going to get done for collusion. So some of the conclusions that we've brought recommendations for the university in increasing that level of peer support and increasing this vibrant mode of the university, while ensuring that students still feel safe about coming onto campus with it, COVID still lingering on in the background. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. This is great. Everyone's sticking to time. This is superb. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions. Okay, so there's a comment from Gerald from St Andrews. The new academic year has just begun. The atmosphere this week has been unlike anything we've had in the last 2 plus years. It's a great feeling, and I quite agree. Being on campus today with graduation is fantastic. Just walking around the town this morning, because we hold it at the Grand Theatre, so you have to walk through town to get there. It was just lovely seeing everyone milling around. So that's it. It does make a difference, and I think it's really important. So yes, okay. So yeah, Nigel posting a comment. It's good to hear. You know, not that long ago, the Times HEIR was postulating potential longer-term culture shifts, and so I think this. And out of interest, you know, although these were primarily mature students who were responding, did you get any impression of how that might have actually impacted very similarly to just students in general, or do you think it was more of a mature student type attitude?
Yeah, I mean, she was very interested in mature students, particularly females, given that was her experience. She wanted to see if others was experiencing the same. But from my just discussions with general students and staff, there are very similar worries and concerns. There's some students that have done very well online and like being online, but the majority miss the face-to-face element. Now, obviously, pre-COVID, universities were shifting towards a blended learning strategy, and we are still in a blended learning world because that's the way we're going. And that kind of creates that flexibility for students to have work, because most of our students work. But I think a lot of the concerns translate. Even if you don't have dependents, you still have relatives who may be vulnerable, and there is always that concern about travelling and passing that on. For example, I wanted to go and see my nieces in my annual leave. Couldn't go because one of them's got COVID. I've got annual leave next week, and the other one's got COVID. So just general things like that. There are still concerns, but I think the biggest thing for me is trying to. I don't want to recreate the atmosphere because it has changed. Everything has changed, but it's getting to an atmosphere that they will feel comfortable with, and they feel belonging is a massive thing in higher education research at the moment. And it's, you know, in Tinto's models from 1970. So it's increasing that sense of belonging for our students, which has been vastly missing for the last couple of years.
And that's something that Mary, of course, picked up this morning in her keynote as well. So I think that's useful. There was a comment from Natalie about have any studies been done on staff perceptions of return to campus? Are you aware of anything?
Not I'm aware of, but it's something that I'm like, because obviously we had the same concerns. So I'm a line manager, so I am aware of all the concerns that my staff had about coming in. They've got a vulnerable partner, they've got a vulnerable child, their child's been sent home from school sick, and so there were a lot of concerns and stress about returning on the staff side of things as well. So I'm hoping that someone has picked that up. As an editor of a journal, I might see it at some point, but I do think someone would have picked that up. As a line manager, certainly saw very, very similar concerns to this, except for the collegiality. I felt there was a lot more collegiality amongst staff when we were thrown in at the deep end, and I'm hoping and praying that that continues. And I think it will. I think we've formed a stronger bond through this, and hopefully that will continue.
Lovely, thank you. And Natalie's just come back. There's a lot of parallels with mature student stuff. Absolutely agree. Wonderful, Ros. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope graduation goes well this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ros. Thank you. Okay, next poster is from Nigel Page from Kingston University. Nigel, I know you're here. Excellent.
I am here. Yes, I can share a version I've got as well, because it's
fantastic. If you're going to
do
a
larger version, so hopefully this will appear.
That's appearing. If you go to presenter mode, that would be great.
I just need to shift you upwards on my screen.
Am I in the way again?
I'm just trying to click at the bottom. That's it. Everyone can see that. Everyone can hear me. Bizarrely, I'm actually in a dormitory in Swansea University. The unique blended learning opportunity of HEIR Online gives me an opportunity to attend a conference in Swansea. So this is a part of a segment called Shifting Student Engagement, and I think, as we commented earlier, it's been interesting to see how things advance. But particularly, I'll be talking here about commuting students, the impact that we've seen on assessment gaps at a London university. So by way of introduction, the reasons for the national awarding gap are complex, and notably pupils from ethnic background, disadvantaged backgrounds in London do better in secondary education. Nonetheless, it's in London where we see some of the largest awarding gaps once students come to university. And it's particularly interesting since most of those students that we get, quite a lot of those students we do get at London universities do remain in the home environment. But one differentiating factor that we do know is that once the ethnic students do come to university, they do tend to have much longer commutes than their white counterparts. And part of this study is to see whether what the impact of that is on any awarding gaps. So our aims have been to determine the contribution of commuting has on the awarding gap, but also to see what would happen if commuting stopped in a, I must admit, rather uncontrolled way that happened during COVID. So previously, we've performed wide-ranging studies to look at the differential impact of commuting on BME students, looking at ethnicity, gender, year of study, age, and we have found that students from ethnic backgrounds tend to have overall double the travel times, irrespective gender, their gender or year of study, and also because of living further away from campus, they do have much greater reliance on using public transport. We did use a one-way sectionality. We looked at one of our science faculties, which has nearly 4,000 students. We compared this a subgroup as well within one of the departments, bioscience department, which has around 800 students. Just looking at, in the first instance, one-way intersectionality, just looking at the difference between the commuting in red here, a commuting attainment gap, the difference between non-commuting and commuting students, and BME attainment throughout that period from 2018 right up to just before last year. We haven't included data for this year yet. In fact, what we have seen is we've seen a drop in a narrowing of the attainment for commuting students, but actually at Kingston we've actually seen an increase in the BME attainment. Considering most of our students are actually BME students are actually commuting, that may sound a little bit odd at first. Well, in the past, we've looked at commuting here, so it's a rather complex slide here, but on the top here, we show differences between commuting students and non-commuting students. In the purple and blue are the white values, and in the green and grey are the ones for BME students. So whether it's for a faculty on the left-hand panel or a department on the right-hand panel, we see that whether they're commuting or non-commuting students, white students tend to perform better than their white counterparts. So whether we take into commuting into account or not, there is a BME attainment gap there. That's pretty much been maintained pre-COVID, but it's interesting to note that when we do see in 2001, we actually see in both cases for the white group and the BME group here, there's almost an intersectionality. They come together and align, which maybe you would expect if commuting had stopped. But in the case of our white students had previously commuted actually seem to have benefited, but it's actually our BME students who are non-commuting who have actually been impacted the most through COVID and seem to be most disadvantaged. And when we look at the data, we actually find that that tends to be more of our black students and mixed race students. Looking at this in a little bit more detail between black, other, mixed, Asian and white students, there is an imbalance here between the number of students, the ratio of students who commute. So we actually have 2.8 times more black students commute than white students. It's almost a 1-to-1 ratio. And here we're looking at differentials on each of these graphs between the Walding gap of commuting and non-commuting students. And if you look closely, there is a contribution here where the green line is actually the mean of say, if we look at the top panel here, that's actually the mean awarding gap. And because of the greater number of commuting students, as an example looking at black, you can see that the mean value is drawn downwards. So in fact, this exacerbates the BME attainment gap simply for the fact that we do have more students who are ethnically diverse. And when we look at the white students in the bottom right-hand panel, you actually see the mean value is actually overall. We found that there is a commuting premium paid, and the commuting premium pre-COVID is above 2%. So whether you're a white student or an ethnic student, there is a premium to place. That premium dropped significantly in 2001. However, what we have found is that actually the commuting difference between BME and white students actually contributes very little to our BME attainment gap. We've estimated it contributes to about 10% difference. And that is primarily because 70% of our students are BME students and 2/3 of those commute, while about 30% of our students are white and only half of those commute. So actually, it's not really a BME attainment gap as such, because there's a premium paid by both of those groups, but it is really, Kingston University does see a 10% contribution towards the attainment gap, what would appear to be a contribution just simply because of these ratios of our students being BME and more of those commuting. When we've broken it down to look at three-way intersectionality, looking at the top panels here, on the top panels here, looking at commuting students and non-commuting students, we've looked at it in terms of gender, index mean deprivation and age. I've highlighted some areas of the table in green. This is where we've seen improvements in student performance. Where we've seen decreases in student performances, I've shown those in red. And those differences are between pre-COVID, the 3 years pre-COVID, compared to 2020 to 21 year. And if we look at the top where the green is, it's actually white male students and also Asian male students who seem to have quite benefited from the pandemic and not commuting. But actually, when we look down, there's an awful lot of red in the panel below, and that is particularly around black students, black female students there, black students particularly who are index mean deprivation in group 1 and 2. So it really does seem to see that actually it's our non-commuting students who have actually been most adversely affected through COVID, who tend to be black. So in conclusion, there are distinct differences in the commuting habits of BME and white students. Commuting contributes to a universal commuting premium, irrelevant of ethnicity. Our commuting ward gaps narrowed during the COVID, but our BME attainment gaps did increase. And what we're looking at here is that actually what we feel has happened is that our white students who were originally commuting have benefited, and their grades have gone up to match their non-commuting counterparts, but it's actually our BME students, particularly the black ones who were previously non-commuting, possibly living around the university, that provided an edge and an advantage to interact. Through COVID, they've lost that interaction with the university, and their performance is more aligned with their counterparts who were commuting previously. And I think that's everything. Hopefully I haven't gone over time.
You have a little bit, Nigel, but I sort of let you carry on because I'm conscious you probably couldn't see me and I didn't want to butt in, but you then got to your conclusion slide.
No.
So you were finishing off at a nice time. Wonderful. Has anyone got a quick question that they would like to ask Nigel? It's a really interesting and important study, I think, to have a look at this, particularly with the importance of award gaps. I'm just out of very sort of interest, because I'm just conscious that our universities are very similar in terms of the students and nature of commuting, etc. Did you notice any difference with the type of commuting? You know, whether people were driving in themselves or travelling in by bus or coming in by tube, because they offer different ways in which they might still access information or do some reading or listen to podcasts, etc. I'm just interested whether that has a variation.
I think during COVID, most of our BME students didn't want to travel, whatever it was, with public transport. Pre-COVID, we do have, in fact, when we did the study, our BME students, a third of our students rely on a rail link on the main arterial line from Waterloo. And if that rail link's out, actually it does indicate to us that about a third of our students would be affected. So actually, if there are rail strikes and things like that, a third of our students wouldn't be able to come in. But actually, COVID and actually having things which we can easily switch lectures online will actually be very beneficial for the future for those students.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Nigel, and well done from doing it from a room in Swansea or wherever you are. That's great.
Yes, thank you. I did fingers crossed there. Thank you.
No, it all worked well. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. So we're now going to pass on to Maura McGinn and Lisa Bennett from University College Dublin. Lisa,
hi Phil, thank you very much.
Hi there.
I have a few slides here, so I might share my screen if that's okay.
Okay, please do. Please do turn your camera on as well if you want to. There we go, fantastic.
Oh, great, thank you. Okay, just one moment and I get this up. Can you see that okay, Phil?
Nothing's come up for me at the moment.
Okay. Let me just try it again, sorry. It's showing on my screen, so I'm not too sure. Is this working by any chance?
Ah, that looks better.
That looks better. Okay, great.
Fantastic.
Thanks for
Lisa.
bearing with me. So this is presentation by Maura and myself, and we've been looking at the impact of COVID-19 on student engagement at University College Dublin. Sorry, this doesn't appear to me. Oh, here we go. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're looking at student engagement in terms of how it's measured via studentsurvey.ie, which is our national survey of student engagement, which collects data on the time and effort that students put into meaningful and purposeful educational activities and the extent to which institutions facilitate this for students. So as we all have been talking about today, the introduction of learning at a distance during COVID-19 had an impact on student engagement in higher education institutions and also in Ireland. And as this is an annual survey, we've been able to track the changes in student engagement from the pre-COVID survey, which took place in 2020, and the COVID survey, which took place in 2021, where students were learning fully at a distance. And then the post-COVID survey in 2022, which took place when students had returned to on-campus learning. So if we look at some of the changes in the data over those 3 years, between 2020, the pre-COVID survey, and 2021, where students were learning at a distance, the indicator scores for all the indicators in student survey for UCD fell between those 2 years as a result of students learning at a distance during the pandemic. And unsurprisingly, the greatest decreases were in the indicators which looked at students' interactions and the relationships with each other and with staff. So for example, collaborative learning, which looks at how students learn and work together, student-faculty interactions, which looks at student relationships and their interactions with staff, and quality of interactions, where students rate their interactions with other students and staff on campus. So between 2021, that learning at a distance survey, and 2022, where students had returned to campus, the indicator scores all rose and largely returned to the 2020 levels. So the largest decrease in 2021 was for quality of interactions, but this indicator has now returned to 2020 levels, as have most others. So I'll just take a closer look at some of those. So if we look at this chart here, this shows the indicator scores for the 9 indicators in the survey. The green bar shows the indicator scores for the 2020 pre-COVID survey. The yellow bar shows the indicator scores for 2021. So comparing that to the green bar, you can see that the extent to which the scores fell between the pre-COVID and the learning at a distance survey. And you can see quite dramatic decreases there for those interactive and collaborative indicators. Looking at the blue bar, which is the indicator scores for UCD for 2022, we can see that for most of the indicators, the scores have returned to the 2020 levels, with the exception of some of the indicators, including higher order learning and collaborative learning. So just going to take a few examples for some of the questions across the various student cohorts. So looking at some of the questions for first-year undergraduates, we can see that thankfully some of the questions that touch on their social and collaborative learning experience have returned to 2020 levels. So their quality of interactions with other students, their attendance at social events have returned to 2020 levels. And even though first years have typically not had low levels of discussing topics with faculty, this has returned to even greater extent than 2020. For final year undergraduate students, again, there's been mostly a recovery for the survey scores there, where students are now reviewing notes to a greater extent than 2020. Their interactions with faculty are higher as well than 2020, and attendance at social events also. However, there's still lower levels reported of preparing for exams with peers, so that aspect of collaborative learning hasn't returned to normal. The scores for graduate taught students, interestingly, haven't returned to 2020 levels for the most part. So here's just some examples of some of the questions in the survey. So as you can see, graduate taught students report making a presentation to lower levels in 2020, their perceptions of feedback from faculty, their blending learning with workplace experience, all again, still lower than 2020 levels. Their social opportunities and working with peers, again, reporting lower levels than 2020, though exercising, they're reporting at a higher level than in the 2020 survey. So just some final thoughts most of the survey scores for first and final year undergraduates have increased since 2021 and thankfully have been restored to 2020 levels. There's still some recovery to be made on questions in the indicators for higher order learning and collaborative learning. So we'll be interested to see will these recover for the 2023 survey. We can see that most of the survey scores for the graduate taught students have not recovered. So we'll be looking to see, can we get some explanations for that through the analysis of the open text comments in the survey, and also as we present these findings to our colleagues across UCD in the coming weeks, and to having discussions with colleagues as to why this might be the case. So thank you very much for listening, everyone.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Lisa. That's great. I just wonder if anyone's got any questions. I know there was a comment from Aisling to say there's very similar trends in DCU for the same survey, and I'm conscious of having been sort of looking at the National Student Survey in the UK, the results, and there's been a sort of a bounce back for many areas in terms of sector, etc., but it's still not back to pre-pandemic levels for many of the questions. Now, there's another question from Aisling here. Do the part-time taught respondents include a greater percentage of part-time learners than the undergraduate cohort? Oh, sorry, my fault, I missed, because there's been an update. Sorry, do the postgrad taught respondents include a greater percentage of part-time learners than the undergrad cohort?
So off the top of my head, they possibly would. Maura, would you have further?
You're right, Lisa. Yeah, we typically would have a lot more part-time in among the graduate taught program. So it does have an effect, and it is a concern though, because of some of the questions that Lisa presented there about the nature of graduate taught education, the fact that they're not getting engaged again in making presentations in class. It's definitely something that we're exploring, as Lisa said, with all the schools and colleges, kind of wondering what is going on in that space. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And there's a quick one from Matt. Were there any distinctions between the more vocational or professional focused subjects compared to academic subjects?
Sorry, I just lost there.
Might lost you there. I can take that one. We have done it by discipline, so we have split by discipline. Off the top of my head, I can't recall now what the medicine and the vet and some of those professional ones are like, but we have split it by discipline, and we are presenting it locally to find out what we can gain from that breakdown.
Lovely, thank you, Maura. Excellent, thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much indeed. That's great, and we'll move on to the next poster. Thank you. There is a question from Rachel. Perhaps you'd like to answer that one in the chat. We can move on to Joanna Carter from the University of Hull. Joanna, are you here? There we go. Fantastic.
Hello.
Would you like to present your own poster, or do you want me to put up? I've got a static picture, but it's up to you.
I will try to present, please. Let's try and get that working.
That's good.
Is that okay?
Great. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Joan.
So I'm going to summarise the work I'm involved in to evolve staff engagement with survey results and interaction with data at the University of Hull. So, like many institutions, we run module and programme surveys at various points of the year, so we have an ongoing reporting schedule. Sharing and communicating student survey data we've produced has historically presented a number of issues. So this is things like survey results being stored in multiple shared areas requiring continuous access control, users having to download large files, multiple versions of files being created for different audiences, and an inability to determine the extent of data dissemination. So a decision was taken at top level to move our data reporting into Power BI. This was implemented for my team and the other 3 teams that sit within our strategic planning directorate. We've learned Power BI through online courses, YouTube, having an internal user group and team sharing sessions, and more recently we did actually have a formal course. And it's taken just over 12 months to produce dashboards which are intended to provide self-service access to the current and previous survey data. They offer the ability to filter selections, to view any combination of available results from the university's structural hierarchy, or define parameters, so level of study or demographic information when it's available. And also we've been able to build into the dashboards more complex calculations now that we have that capability, and that these will change according to the dynamic filter selections being made. So in terms of having a communication strategy around promoting this across the university, we've tried to do this in as many ways as we could think up. So we send out information by email, make references and links within committee reports, and post to the internal bulletin. Staff have had the option to attend drop-in sessions to go through the basics of accessing the dashboards and also seeing a demo. What we do currently in a separate format is our comment analysis, but what we can do is link to these external files from the dashboard, which is an accessibility improvement. So this is an example of a 5-year trend analysis tab in our NSS dashboard. So we've got internal quartile positions against the sector, year-on-year results, year-on-year differences from the sector, and we've been able to incorporate what I'll call a valid change result. So this is whether the results are likely to be significantly different from the previous year, and we use a RAG rating for that, a red, amber, green, as to whether it's positive change, amber for no change, and red is that there's been some negative change. And we're only in the early stages of monitoring the impact the dashboards are having. We can observe the number of visits to them by department, and that's been a useful early indicator of engagement. And we've also been able to make changes quite swiftly, and we can immediately refresh those into the live version. There have been some challenges, and there continue to be some challenges. So we're encountering a lack of feedback when we're requesting this through an online survey. So we've got a button in the dashboards that links through to a survey where we've got several questions that we want to ask staff about how they're finding the experience, and we're not getting the engagement with this. And we tend to get our feedback through just just casual conversations that are just happening by chance or are happening sort of during meetings where we might sort of be talking about surveys. Another challenge is that we're very aware of how survey questions and structures are changing all the time. And this is problematic when you wanted to set up consistent rules and calculations in a dashboard. However, we do have to keep that in mind, that the validity of the surveys has to take precedence. So we don't want to be trying to make our surveys fit existing structures. So we have to be ready to be dynamic with that. The dashboards, they're a self-select tool for accessing and interrogating data, but some users still request flat file tables to us, and we currently have some limits on the export options from our publishing platform. So we've still got those sort of competing demands of the format that our staff are looking to find this data. Also, the access to the dashboards has to be from a university managed device, but we do get queries coming through from staff who are using their own personal devices and then finding they're blocked. So there's a bit of a barrier to engagement. One of the other teams in the directorate are taking the approach of staff having to request access to the data. So that would involve them attending a 15-minute demo session and then they get granted access to the dashboard. So in our team, I think that's something we're going to consider in the future, whereas we're giving everybody access at the moment, but should we actually flip that and have staff come to us? It's something to think about. Our future direction is to continually improve the efficiency of the data processing aspects, to be able to spend more time doing work on staff engagement and our analysis. And I think we'd like to move to a storytelling approach for some aspects to convey key messages. But this leaves the issue of minimal feedback coming through to us about what action's been taken and what further data we could collect to evaluate the effectiveness of any response and the ongoing reporting of issues over time. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks very much indeed, Joanna. That's superb. Any questions? I didn't spot anything in the chat. Does anyone have any questions? Oh dear, that's nasty. I can see myself. How awful. Just out of interest. Oh, actually, yes. So, Elena, please do come in.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, Joanna. We are still on this journey. We are developing dashboards for our institutional surveys. I think I've spotted you mentioned that there is a link to comments analysis as well from the dashboard. So I just wonder, is it kind of institutional analysis or analysis by department? Who did this analysis? So how does it work?
Yeah, so in the team I'm in, we also do the comment analysis where we code up the comments from all our surveys. So the annual surveys, and we do some degree of comment coding of our MEQ data as well. So that's just something we produce in separate Excel files. But we share these, so we put these into a cloud-based platform and then we can share the links to those.
That's great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And a quick one from Matt, out of interest, what were you moving from?
So before Power BI?
Yeah, it was also a question to Claire in the chat who's moving to Power BI.
Sorry.
But interested in both cases.
And there's a sort of an offer from Paula Keys, but before we sort of carry on, they're 6 years into the journey into Power BI at the University of South Wales and could share some learning. So that sounds a useful outcome from the event.
Yeah, great. To pick up on the other question, we were previously producing everything in Excel workbooks. And as we were basically trying to produce dashboards within Excel, and it works to an extent, but then they just become so heavy and such large files that it couldn't do everything we wanted it to do.
Brilliant. So. Well, thank you very much indeed, Joanna, and good luck with the rest of the journey and getting everybody on board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. And then our final poster for today, I'm delighted to welcome Stephanie Klein from Explorance, our sponsors. Stephanie, do you want to, I've seen you around. Oh, no, here we go. Here we go, fantastic. Do you want me to put your poster on the screen?
Yes, please, that would be great, thank you.
Let me just move to the right one. Okay, I hope you can see that, and over to you.
Great, thank you. And thanks everybody for sticking around. I know we're a few minutes over time. Stephanie Klein, Principal Consultant at Explorance, wanting to share some thoughts about ensuring that our data can drive greater student success. We have a number of challenges listed here. I'm going to leave them for you to read, but simply summarize: institutions want and need students to succeed, in part because student retention is critical for long-term institutional sustainability. I will mention these specific statistics are US-based, as I am, but the trends are very similar across UK and Europe institutions. So yes, the institution of the future is student obsessed, but obsession with student success requires focus well beyond just the student. And one of the things that we've seen emerging, and this goes back to an earlier question in one of the other poster presenters about kind of impact on staff, is that institutional efforts to support students and faculty are being delivered by increasingly overworked staff. You know, back in March 2020, the support for this rapid pivot to online and remote learning was initially a sprint. But since then, the volume and urgency have not declined. So staff are being asked to maintain sprint pacing for the duration of a marathon. And their teams have reduced capacity. They've often lost expertise in a trend that began with early retirement incentives that were offered in 2020 and 2021 by institutions facing financial difficulties. And, you know, so early retirement was an alternative to staff reductions in other ways. And these turnover rates continue to be high as employees burn out. We've noted some solutions to the challenges, and they link to the graphic on the right. So I'd like to just talk that through a little bit. If we break down the student life cycle, we see all of these opportunities for measuring moments that matter to the student life cycle, to the student journey, to the student experience, inside and outside the classroom. That bottom segment is, you know, an indicator of that time within the classroom. And so for solution number 3, holistic evaluations, this is an assertion, let's call it, that looking at instructor effectiveness across sources of feedback, not just the student feedback that we get from course and module evaluations, but also peer review, self-review, and bringing that together into a holistic look at teacher effectiveness helps ensure instructors are continuously improving so that they can maximize their contributions to the in-class experiences, which of course layer well into all of the out-of-class student experiences. The next solution points to the reality that measurement alone is insufficient. Data is great, but data that we can't extract insights from, and insights that can't help us make decisions that allow us to act for actual impact on student success, just leaves us with a lot of data. And one of the bullet points in the challenges is where we see that so many institutions are conducting student success studies, but the majority don't feel that they can effectively implement the results of those studies. Coming back to those staff who are supporting students both directly and indirectly, one element to help retention is institutions maybe needing to consider whether they're offering the types of professional development opportunities that will keep their staff engaged and empowered, as well as, of course, one would hope, reducing the overload of work that many of their staff are facing. Lastly, we want to make sure that all data is being used. Numeric data tends to be, I won't say simple, but relatively straightforward to analyze if it's, you know, collected well, and certainly within our institutional research cohort, we know what to do with data. and we have the capacity and capability to analyze numeric data. But we also know that many institutions are sitting on virtual mountains of open-ended comments that they may not have the tools or capacity to make full use of. And so automation, such as machine learning-based comments analysis, is an essential tool to synthesize data and extract insights. So this is our view of how student obsession could and perhaps should play out within our institutions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Stephanie. That's very good. Now, I lost you for a moment, so I'm hoping that the screen share stayed. I had a sort of so I'm hoping that that didn't disappear whilst I was having a technical issue my end. I was
able to see it. I don't know about everybody else.
That's brilliant. That's great. That's good to know. I don't know if there's any questions. I think whilst people sort of typing or want to come in, I think that the point you were just making there about institutions sitting on a mountain of sort of free comments, I think is really important, because I'm very conscious that we'll ask students something, we sometimes get the response, but we've already told you this. And now it might be they've told us through a survey or through something else, or whatever it is. But sometimes we don't always pick up on those things. So of course they think, well, why should I tell you again? I've already fed it back. So you then start to get that, well, what's the point in me telling you sort of attitude? I think it's really important that therefore, we do as much as we can with the data. It's so important that the students have taken that time to respond to us, that we're almost obliged to do something with that. So
we really are, and there's a lot of emerging awareness that survey fatigue is less about survey fatigue and more about inaction fatigue. And we see that in organizations with their employee engagement surveys. We also see that in higher ed institutions with their student experience surveys and course evaluations, where the more students feel that their feedback won't be acted upon, the less likely they are to give feedback the next time around. And so, yes, making use of the information that they've taken the time to give us, and it's a cycle, right? Because if students are feeling like their comments are being thrown away, then they're giving throwaway comments, and instructors are less likely to take those comments seriously and apply them to improve their learning, and back and forth and back and forth. So the alternative is to create a feedback culture, which a lot of institutions have worked very hard and very successfully at doing. And when we get that relationship between students feeling like they're part of this institutional community where it's their responsibility to give feedback, knowing that instructors really value it, it's a completely different game as far as this, ensuring that the student experience is being continually improved.
And I think that also goes for that holistic experience you were talking about, because of course, the students don't just experience the classroom, they experience everything around it as well. And having the opportunities to feedback on all elements of their higher education experience, I think is really important. So lovely, thank you. I don't think there have been any more comments. I think there's one from Matt, but I think relates to the previous one. So in that case, Stephanie, I hope the time difference has been okay in terms of working out for you for this presentation, and thank you very much. Can I thank all the presenters who have taken the time to submit posters and come along to the lightning session. It's been wonderful to have the opportunity to bring in some sort of non-invited speakers, as it were, through the poster opportunities. So my thanks to everybody who's taken the time to do that. There is one poster that wasn't part of the lightning session. It's another one from Ros Collings and another student, because the student wasn't able to make that. So please do take the time to have a look at that, and please go back and have a look at the posters and engage with those, and sort of follow up on any points you wish to do so. So I think, Rachel, I'm pretty much on time to hand over to you for the final part of today's conference. And I'm hoping that Rachel's there and her internet hasn't gone. There we go, that's good.
No, sorry, my screen just froze temporarily. Thank you very much, Phil. I'm just going to post a link into the chat. Right, Thank you all very much. I'm going to be really brief because I'm very aware of time and lunches. So we've reached the end of the first half of our conference. Thank you all for joining with us and bearing with us with the seemingly inevitable Wi-Fi issues. Well done, Michelle, for persevering, and thank you, Steve and Gerald, for your expert sharing under such pressure. Hope you found it a useful and interesting morning. There's plenty of food for thought there. We'll make sure we share all the PowerPoints, etc. with you as soon as we collect them all up and gather them. And we'll work with Michelle to re-record her video so you can enjoy uninterrupted her full talk. As I say, I've just put the evaluation survey link from Explorance in the chat. Please do fill it in, or later tomorrow. If you're only able to join us for today, please fill it in today. So I just want to do a quick thank you to all of our presenters, our keynote, Mary Kernock-Cook, our invited speakers, Michelle, Liz and Alan, all of our poster contributors. Thank you for sharing your work, and Explorance, of course, for your continued sponsorship. All of the HEIR team for some brilliant sharing, and all of you for joining us and for your contributions. And whilst we're here, I'm just going to take chair's privilege and just do a big thank you to Vicky McDonald, who's my PA and our departmental administrator, who's been, as I said at the beginning, an absolute star in getting us organised and keeping the conference going. Vicky, it's her last day at Brighton today. I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for all your work for me, for the University of Brighton, and for your help in putting these events on and for the conference. We're going to miss you lots and wish you lots of luck in your new adventures. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you. So we look forward to hopefully you can all join us tomorrow, and we look forward to seeing you all here again. We'll start promptly at 9:45 tomorrow, and we've got another day of wonderful speakers and engagement. So thanks very much, everyone. See you tomorrow.